Hello and welcome to today's webcast on AI in action, driving business value through technology, brought to you by Insight and Intel. Below this webcast, you will see an attachments tab where you can navigate to after this webinar. There you can find additional information on assets regarding today's topic. I would now like to turn over this presentation to our speaker, Ben Kotvis, Insight's Principal Architect. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about AI in action, driving business value through technology. So we'll start by talking about the state of the market, specifically around generative AI. This is a representation of different roles within an organization and how much they have actually already started to experiment with generative AI. And you can see marketing and advertising is on the top at 37% to 35% for technology. And those are probably to be expected, right? Marketing folks have probably the biggest to gain from generative AI. And we'll get into a little more detail about what it is and what types of roles what kinds of job functions can be uh, take advantage of generative AI, and it'll make a little more sense as to why if you're not familiar with it. And so this is going to lead to a significant amount of disruption when it comes to how certain job activities can be automated. So we estimate that between 60 and 70% of employees' time could be automated in some of their work activities using generative AI and some of the ability for it to create content and create information. Half of work activities could be automated in the next, was that 35 years, 36 years for between 2030 and 2060. And then generative AI can enable labor productivity growth between 0.1 and 0.6% annually through 2040. So there's a lot of potential here, and that's the reason we're talking about it today. So I let on a little bit in the last slide about the impact on the workplace and disruption. So why is there such a concern on this? Well, from a productivity standpoint, you can do a lot more with less. So you may be able to create like a job posting or a job summary or do image generation from a small prompt, just leading with certain words to provide that to the generative AI models to give you something on the other end of it. And it's also very creative. So some of the tasks that may have been in the hands of folks that had certain creative abilities and could kind of write something from scratch are now enabled by using generative AI. And so there's just a lot of new opportunities that in the past were just unattainable, and you would never think to use any type of computing to solve those tasks. The disruption is something that we're just kind of starting to realize from a learning curve standpoint. How does somebody interact with it? What kinds of prompts should be used? Should this always be some type of conversational agent, or can it be done with some type of tighter integration into business processes? What kinds of changes are there going to be to business processes if you start automating certain pieces of job roles? Where does the automation start and where does it end? And where does the human intervention come into play? And so that really creates essentially brand new processes and different chains of responsibility that have to be defined that currently aren't. And then from a business model standpoint, if you're taking some of that human labor and moving it into something that's being compute is generating for you, you have to start considering the cost of compute and how you're going to work that into your business model and maybe how you recover some of the costs of that. And then on the employee side, workforce changes. What kinds of training are people going to need to get in order to be more familiar with using these tools? Are they going to have different types of skills and move into different roles? And where is this automation going to be fit into the jobs that they currently have? And so quite a bit of different impact on the workplace in these three areas: productivity, disruption, and employees. 80% of jobs can incorporate generative AI technology into their work activities, which is quite a bit. And 300 million jobs, representing about 18% of the global workforce, could be automated in some way. I personally think that's a little aggressive, but these are the types of impacts that people are starting to consider, and some of the risks and rewards of using generative AI. So the state of play, this slide gives us a really good understanding of some of the best practices, and not only from a process standpoint as you start identifying use cases for generative AI, but also some of the risks and benefits that you will encounter. So from a process perspective, it's really important to start with identifying the outcome. You you need to know, is there a use case that's going to move the needle? And of course, what is the potential value of that outcome? And so that's kind of a great place to start. From there, you can evaluate the effectiveness to accomplish that goal. Um, you start to look at what kind of data you have. Do you have enough of that data? Is that data pretty unbiased, and is it well representing, a broad set of information or something very narrow? And because based on that, that's going to help you understand how you're going to actually, build out a use case, and whether or not that's going to be able to achieve that outcome or not. And then determining the appropriate level of automation. Where does this fit into these work roles like we talked about in the last slide? How much automation is there? Is it going to be clumsy, or is it going to be something that fits in really well? What tools will people use to take advantage of that? And how are you going to test that going to achieve the outcomes that you're looking for? And then ethical considerations are something that's growing considerably, thinking about different bias and harm and hallucinations that AI might present that otherwise would not necessarily be a concern when humans are creating this content. And so that's something that has to be considered as you start using this, is really almost testing different variables, and maybe even being kind of obnoxious with these generative AI models to see how they respond to you so that you can make sure that they're have the proper controls and enforcements. So we do that with some of the best practices here on the right by using, from a data and security privacy standpoint, you're going to have high quality and trusted data. The AI is not going to happen without a lot of really good data. So if you don't have a lot of good data, then you probably can't create your own AI. Know the provenance. So where did your data come from? How long have you had it? Is it a good broad representation? Has that data been scrubbed for some reason or another? Is it a subset, or is it something that spans a long period of time, so it has good representations of maybe seasons of the year and different variables like that? And then monitoring the output, kind of coming back to those ethical considerations we were talking about before. You've got to make sure that you're getting the output that you expect and that there's no harm that's coming from that. And then tweaking the prompt engineering so that you make sure that this is giving you the answer in as few steps as possible. So you want to make sure that you're building that model so that it's well tuned to the use case and not something that somebody has to interact with for a long time to get to the information that they need. Um, it's really, really important that you always use access control and um, encryption, and that your data is secure, not only from a training perspective, so that if you have data that should be secured before you do training on it, that it's done properly, but also when you're sending responses back to people, that you haven't leaked out any information that they shouldn't see, based on maybe some role-based access controls that are in place. Being transparent, it's really important that people can see why the responses were made the way they were, so that they can make corrections if needed. And it can't just be a black box that's creating really interesting things on the other end of it. You have to be able to show your work. And then ensuring security and privacy policies are enforced before and after things are processed. And so you're making sure that you're not throwing things into the AI model that should be secure. And then, of course, on the other end, that you're not leaking out things that shouldn't be seen. Responsible AI is really kind of around that bias and harm that we talked about before, but make sure that you have a policy for that and that you're abiding to that. And then minimizing your exposure to and making no assumptions related to handling the generation of information. So you just can't really lean 100% on any of open source models or any of the foundational models out there, but you've got to make sure that you are enforcing your policies on top of that. But when it comes to, these are all the risks and challenges and some of the work involved in trying to build these, but the benefits are pretty enormous and extraordinary. So there's the ability to increase efficiency. You have the ability to automate tasks. We talked about that a little bit before. but having the ability to maybe generate a whole new PowerPoint slide or a whole new job posting from scratch is really powerful. Some of these use cases, like having an assistant or a sidekick that you can use, like if you've ever used Microsoft Office 365 Copilot, is kind of right there under your fingertips whenever you're working within the Office suites. Education and training, having the ability to kind of fine tune training tasks based on your current capabilities, and then decision acceleration. So just being able to get to the right answer more quickly and not spending a lot of time looking through frequently asked questions or knowledge bases. Those are some really key benefits. Improved accuracy, saving money, and then human-like interactivity. Those are some of the big benefits that weren't previously realized through other tools. And then the challenges, we talked a lot about some of these, but you've got compliance, bias, limited capabilities, trust. So I think from a limited capability standpoint, it's really important to think about how much data you have, because that does limit the ability of your solutions to provide the outcomes that you're looking for. So that's a key piece of this that we haven't really come across here. Compliance, if you have particular obligations that you have for whatever industry you're in, you've got to make sure that you're abiding to those. And building the right trust, and then prompt engineering, as we spoke about a little bit before, but you want to make sure that that's really fine-tuned to the use case. So this is a great slide to show kind of a matrix of different use cases and how they align to the key areas of generative AI. And what those are is finding data, summarizing data, and creating content. And really that's the kind of key things you'll get with a generative AI. They also have the ability to create code and generate things. That's really kind of an extension of creation on the right there. So those two kind of fall somewhat in the same lane. But there's some really interesting use cases. I won't cover all of these, but you can see, like in marketing, you can do trend analysis. Finance, you can generate financial statements. For IT, you can find different network security vulnerabilities. You could summarize some of the performance monitoring for a huge server farm that you might have. And legal, you might have some legal briefs that you want to create. And instead of having to manually read through all of those different legal documents, you can just throw it into an index and let generative AI do that for you. And then HR, you might have employee feedback. That's something that can be summarized from some information you have about that employee. And so a lot of really interesting use cases we have in this matrix. And I think that it gives you some sense of areas that some of these different specific capabilities of generative AI plug into that. So finding, summarizing, and creating. So ROI is AI, or ROI of AI as a measure of value creation. This is a great visualization or an illustration of how you've realized value from AI, and it's kind of as you can see, an iterative process, starting with stakeholder priorities and goals. We look at what goals are there in the organization. They could be financial, they could be competitive advantage. And then you started doing exploration of areas that will help you achieve those goals. So, what is the technology that's going to be required? What techniques are going to be there? What approaches do we have? Do we have the right staff in-house to help us get there? And then we have to think about some of the AI value enablers. So, what kinds of companies, what kinds of partners, what tools do we have that would help us enable those values? So we've got some great partners like Intel that might help us with, from a hardware perspective or software perspective, with OpenVINO. They can help accelerate some of these workloads that we might want to distribute out to inferencing on the edge, for example. And so we want to know what partners those are and how we would plug them into different solutions. Quantifying the benefits to the organization. So we want to think about what are those benefits, how we'll measure those benefits. Areas like customer acquisition, retention, compliance, employee engagement. Oh, if you can increase employee engagement, let's put a value under that so we know if this is going to help us get actual ROI. We don't want to just assume there's ROI, but let's quantify that in a meaningful way. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide in detail. And then we start to tell the story. And it's really important here to think about what is the story that this is telling in order to get those priorities and goals accomplished. And so using the technology, speaking to those goals and telling that story really helps people understand what you're doing and helps people kind of evangelize that internally and externally if needed. So it's really important to leverage that story and get good at telling it. You want to exploit and optimize, grow, and leverage that story and the technology to get you to to accomplish these priorities and goals. And then from a governance standpoint, you'll need to enable all the right governance policies, cultural transformation practices, repeatability, DevOps, MLOps, anything like that in there so that everything is going to be kosher with the organization's standards when it comes to building out solutions, and that they're repeatable and they're stable and robust so that it's not some kind of sloppy solution you have in the corner there that is um, something that people can't really rely on because it's unlike anything else that's out there. You want to make sure that it's consistent and like the other solutions have the same level of stability and quality. And then as we're looking at the reviewing the solution, we want to make sure that we've achieved that stakeholder impact and those priorities and goals, and that we've if we haven't realized those goals, we're going to be cycling back through here and reevaluating those priorities. And you can see that we can go through this cycle again and again. So it's really important to do that analysis of that impact as you continue to move through this cycle and realize that value. So the way we do this is by spotting these use cases, identifying these problems, like whether it's faster retrieval, synthesis of information, or creating a response. These are you want to make sure that you not only can use something like with generative AI, but it's actually an applicable solution to a problem that you have. Then you have to think about the data. Is this data that's private or public? So what risks are there in place because of the public and private data? And what opportunities can it bring? And I think it's important from a public or private data standpoint. One of the challenges around generative AI is the data that it's trained on may or may not be copyrighted. And so you have to consider, am I putting myself at risk by building a solution around data that I don't own and that someone else actually does? So those are things that people are considering as they're starting to use AI, and it's important that you understand if it's data that you 100% own yourself, then it's not really a problem. But if you're using something in one of the foundational models, you might have some risks there because you don't own all of that data. And then envisioning the outcome. If you do solve this problem, does it save you the time and money, generate revenue, or reduce risk? And now we get to that quantification and thinking about, a very simple sense, this is no different than really any other software solution. You're thinking about, okay, if this helps somebody answer a question and they did it this much more quickly, as opposed to maybe an hour of research doing content generation that was about $100 in savings, and you scale that over the span of a year. 1 hour of research content, that's $100 an hour, 100 employees, 260 working days, that's 2.6 million a year. And again, this is not unlike trying to figure out ROI for a lot of other things, but you really want to get specific about what the value is, what tasks are being automated or being assisted by these AIs, and what the value is with that. So we look at transforming infrastructure with, on the left here, you have a lot of different point solutions that are very discrete and they have their own distinct technology stack. They have different software solutions involved. They may or may not have AI. You can see some of the consistent things that they have is obviously CPUs, GPUs, operating systems, memory, input, output. Our goal as an organization with our partners like Intel is to really help people realize more value by being able to kind of consolidate some of this into hardware in certain situations where it makes sense, so that they can use more kind of distinct hardware that's going to run multiple solutions on it. So if you have the ability to use a modern infrastructure with containers or virtual machines where you can take what may have run on a physical device before and run that on on a single device, I'm sorry, from one single device to multiple use cases on another device, as you can see on the right here, that gives you the ability to modernize and improve those without having to displace that hardware. And a lot of the virtualization with containers and microservices has really enabled that in a more meaningful way that wasn't really possible before. And so as we work with partners like Intel, we've got a lot of great solutions that'll help us to modernize and run more than one use case at a time on infrastructure, and that really opens a lot of possibilities of really saving a lot of money on some of the operating costs, because as you can see, there's an operating system on each one of these on the left. You really only need one operating system on the right, and that consolidates a lot of the overhead of some of that the memory and I/O and CPU and GPU. So great opportunities there to leverage that as we see modern infrastructure continuing to evolve. Here's some case studies we have. We have a great use case here with a manufacturing client of ours. The challenge was that they were responsible for manufacturing 100,000 different products, and there were human-driven processes that were delaying sales cycles, and they were just really missing out on a lot of opportunities. Um, they they couldn't take advantage of attached revenue because they were spending so much time on this, and they needed technical folks to come in and identify some of the core components to make recommendations for compatible products. So, like for example, if a product wasn't available when someone was looking for it, there was a lot of human intervention in that recommendation to say, hey, you should try a different product instead, and this will meet your needs in this way, and it's cost maybe X number of dollars more or X number of dollars less. So the way that we helped this organization was to come in using a solution accelerator we have called Lens, and that took information from their CRM data system, from their resource contact resource management system, and moving it into Databricks so that they could do some analysis on it and enable ML to actually start driving some recommendations from some pre-existing data. So they enabled Power BI, which is kind of a BI tool that will allow them to see some of that information and then essentially fine tune those models so that they could start automating some of those recommendations. On the outcome side, we were able to, in 8 weeks, we were able to generate a new pipeline of $15 million, and that was going to provide a projected annual revenue of another $50 million. And the model's capabilities are extendable. So it's not something that's just for one use case, but it can be driven into many use cases. And just some of the takeaways with this, as we talk about a modern data architecture, these are meant so that you can build more use cases and it can be cumulative using a similar architecture. So you're not just starting from scratch every time. Another use case here is a really great story about um, patient outcomes being improved for people with high blood pressure. So we have an app that someone was able to use to actually provide targeted treatment recommendations for these patients. And it was based on unique data, including some of the symptoms and comorbidities for those particular patients. And again, in this case, we used machine learning to help provide this information. So essentially, you look at large sets of patient data, and you're able to look at the individual attributes about those patients, and then align those using machine learning to say, okay, well, based on these, we see these particular patterns, and we can recommend certain treatment recommendations to those patients because of those patterns that we see. And what's really amazing here is some of the outcomes on the right here. You can see 100 additional days of life per patient due to better personalized care. So having something that was not just a kind of a shotgun approach to patient care, but something very, very specific. Of course, it doesn't cost as much because it's using machine learning and it's automated. So you have an average of $2,000 per year in healthcare cost savings for 20% of the hypertension patient population. And then never have seen before accuracy with roughly 800 patient data points informing the ML model. So some really meaningful outcomes from some of these use cases we've had with clients. You can see this is a large organization with 6,496 beds in 21 hospitals. So at Insight, with our partners like Intel, we have complete data and AI capabilities. And you see on the top here, we've got artificial intelligence, the modern data platform, and business intelligence on the bottom here. And that's really optimized through data infrastructure and cloud. So you have the ability to take your modern infrastructure and take advantage of that by deploying some of these workloads like we talked about before in containers, and that gives you the ability to modernize these things more quickly and iterate through these solutions and the problems and the bugs more quickly and get to the outcomes that you're looking for more quickly. And then it's really important to always remember having that data strategy and governance, and that has to be a fundamental part of these solutions as you develop them.